Have you ever found yourself deeply drawn to a woman who seemed to perfectly embody everything you've been searching for, only to gradually realize that something feels wrong? There's an inexplicable power dynamic at play that you can't quite identify, a feeling of being emotionally drained rather than fulfilled. Today, you're about to discover the dark archetypal pattern that Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychologist, identified decades ago, a pattern so deeply embedded in the collective unconscious that most men completely miss it until they're already emotionally entangled. This isn't comfortable knowledge. It's not what dating coaches sell you. It's not what modern psychology typically discusses. It's the raw, unfiltered truth about a shadow aspect of feminine psychology that Jung warned about. The devouring mother archetype disguised as the ideal lover. You feel the pain of this pattern every day without naming it. The confusion when she's nurturing one moment and emotionally volatile the next. The exhaustion from constantly trying to please someone whose standards seem to shift like quicksand. The profound loneliness of giving everything emotionally and still feeling like you're never quite enough. The solution isn't to avoid women or to become cynical. Jung never advocated that. Instead, he offered something far more powerful: psychological integration and true understanding of both the feminine archetype and your own internal feminine aspect, your anima. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just why your relationships might be following destructive patterns, but exactly how to transform your relationship with the feminine, both within yourself and in your external relationships. In Jungian psychology, archetypes are universal, primordial images and patterns that reside in what Jung called the collective unconscious. Think of them as ancient templates of human experience that all of us who, regardless of culture or upbringing, inherit psychologically. The feminine archetype isn't one-dimensional. It contains a profound duality that Jung clearly identified: the nurturing mother and the devouring mother. Both exist simultaneously in the collective unconscious, and both shape how women love, nurture, connect, and yes, sometimes manipulate. You've experienced the nurturing mother energy when a woman in your life provides genuine care, emotional support, and nurturing without demanding your psychological submission in return. This aspect brings healing, growth, and authentic connection. But have you recognized when you've encountered the devouring mother? This shadow aspect doesn't announce itself with warning signs. It operates subtly, often disguised as love and care. When a woman in your life alternates unpredictably between intense affection and cold withdrawal, creating an addictive cycle where you're constantly striving to regain her approval, that's the devouring mother pattern at work. When she seems to intuitively know your emotional vulnerabilities and unconsciously uses them to maintain control in the relationship, that's the devouring mother. When her care comes with invisible strings attached, creating inescapable webs of obligation and guilt, that's the devouring mother. But here's what Jung would want you to understand deeply. This isn't about blaming women. The real psychological insight is far more profound. Jung identified that every man carries within his psyche a feminine aspect called the anima. This is your internal feminine, the part of you that connects to emotion, intuition, relationship, and the non-linear aspects of life. When you haven't consciously developed a healthy relationship with your own anima, you remain emotionally immature. This creates a dangerous psychological vacuum that you unconsciously try to fill by projecting your unintegrated feminine qualities onto actual women in your life. You don't see the real woman standing before you. Instead, you see a projection screen for your own unfulfilled emotional needs, a savior, a muse, someone who will complete you. This projection makes you psychologically blind. You become vulnerable not because women are inherently manipulative, but because your own unacknowledged emotional needs create the perfect conditions for unconscious relationship dynamics to unfold. Think about your past relationships. How quickly did you elevate her to an impossible ideal? How devastated were you when the real human being inevitably failed to match the goddess you'd projected onto her? How confused were you by your own emotional reactions that seemed disproportionate to the actual situations? These are all symptoms of an unintegrated anima, your disowned feminine aspect seeking external representation because you haven't learned to relate to it consciously within yourself. The shadow feminine doesn't manifest as obvious abuse. If it did, you'd recognize and avoid it easily. Instead, it operates through subtle psychological patterns that can feel confusingly like love. When she praises your potential rather than your actual achievements, creating an unconscious dynamic where you're always striving to become worthy rather than feeling inherently valued. When her emotional responses seem disproportionate to situations, leaving you walking on eggshells, constantly adjusting your behavior to manage her emotional state. When she positions herself as the primary interpreter of your emotional life, you don't really feel that way. What you actually need is when she creates triangulation dynamics, subtly comparing you to other men or bringing up past relationships in ways that keep you insecure and striving. When she oscillates between treating you as omnipotent, expecting you to solve all her problems, and incompetent, not trusting you with basic tasks. These patterns create a psychological dependence that drains your vital energy. You find yourself thinking about her constantly, analyzing her responses, trying to predict her reactions, and gradually losing connection with your own authentic self. Jung recognized that this dynamic isn't simply personal psychology, it's archetypal. It has played out in millions of relationships throughout human history. It's embedded in mythology, literature, and the collective unconscious. Now we arrive at the profound revelation Jung would want you to understand. The insight that can transform your entire relationship with both women and yourself. What you're experiencing in these relationships isn't simply interpersonal conflict. It's an archetypal drama playing out through your unintegrated psyche. When you feel emotionally consumed in a relationship with a woman who alternates between idealization and devaluation, between nurturing and controlling, you aren't simply dealing with her personal psychology. You are being devoured by an archetype. The devouring mother aspect operates through the personality of an emotionally unintegrated woman, but its power comes from connecting with the wounded anima within you. It creates a perfect psychological lock-and-key mechanism that can keep you trapped for years, even decades, in destructive relationship patterns. This is why willpower alone isn't enough to break these patterns. This is why conventional relationship advice often fails. You're not dealing with just conscious behavior, but with unconscious forces that have evolutionary and collective roots. When you feel that inexplicable magnetic pull toward a woman who simultaneously makes you feel special and inadequate, chosen and yet never quite enough, what you're really experiencing is your own disowned feminine aspect, seeking recognition through external relationship. The more you deny your own emotional depth, vulnerability, and need for nurturing, the more desperately your psyche will project these qualities onto women in your life, and the more vulnerable you become to relationships where the devouring mother archetype plays out. And here's the devastating truth. As long as you remain unconscious of this pattern, you will recreate it in relationship after relationship, with different women who somehow always end up triggering the same emotional wounds and playing out the same destructive dynamics. What you're truly seeking isn't a woman who will save you. What you're seeking is integration of your own feminine aspect, your anima, that you've disowned and projected outward. Every time you felt emotionally consumed, manipulated, or drained in a relationship, you weren't simply experiencing one woman's behavior. You were experiencing the consequence of your own unintegrated psychology, meeting the unintegrated feminine in an unconscious archetypal dance that Jung identified over a century ago. So where does this leave you? Not in despair, but at the threshold of profound transformation. Jung didn't share these psychological insights to condemn either men or women, but to illuminate the path toward wholeness. The awakening begins when you stop externally blaming women and turn your attention inward. Start by recognizing your wounded anima, your disowned emotions, your fear of emotional autonomy, your psychological dependence on being cared for like a child. What you've been seeing in her was only what was missing in you. This is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating the disparate aspects of your psyche into a cohesive, authentic whole. It starts with honest self-reflection. How have you been avoiding your own emotional life, expecting women to carry that burden for you? Where have you been seeking a mother figure rather than an equal partner? How have you elevated women to goddesses, only to demonize them when they failed to maintain that impossible standard? The path forward isn't to avoid women, but to approach relationships from a place of greater consciousness. When you begin integrating your own anima, developing your emotional intelligence, honoring your intuition, embracing your capacity for nurturing connections, you'll no longer project these qualities so desperately onto the women in your life. And something remarkable happens. You begin to see women not as archetypal figures, neither saviors nor destroyers, but as fellow human beings on their own journeys of individuation, with their own shadows and light. This is the profound transformation Jung invited us toward, not a battle between genders, but a deep reconciliation of the masculine and feminine within each of us. How do you actually begin this integration process? Jung outlined several practical approaches that remain powerful today. First, develop conscious awareness of your projections. When you feel that overwhelming emotional charge, positive or negative, toward a woman, pause and ask yourself, what part of myself am I seeing in her? The qualities that trigger the strongest emotional reactions are often the very aspects of yourself you've disowned. Second, begin an active dialogue with your anima. Jung recommended practices like active imagination and dream work to communicate with this internal feminine aspect. Pay special attention to the women who appear in your dreams. They often represent aspects of your anima seeking integration. Third, cultivate emotional literacy. Many men have been conditioned to have a limited emotional vocabulary, primarily anger and desire, with everything else remaining undifferentiated. Expand your capacity to identify, name, and express the full spectrum of human emotions. Fourth, examine your relationship with mother figures in your life. The devouring mother archetype often gains power through unresolved maternal dynamics. How did your relationship with your mother shape your expectations of women? What emotional patterns established in childhood are you unconsciously recreating in adult relationships? Fifth, develop relationships with women based on mutual growth rather than psychological dependency. The healthiest relationships occur between two individuals actively engaged in their own individuation processes, supporting but not completing each other. When you commit to this path of integration, relationships transform from unconscious archetypal dramas into conscious partnerships. The compulsive quality dissolves. The emotional volatility stabilizes. The desperate need to be saved by the perfect woman fades away as you learn to nurture and understand your own feminine aspect. This understanding doesn't just transform your romantic relationships, it ripples outward into every area of your life. Your creativity deepens as you access the generative aspects of your anima. Your emotional resilience increases as you no longer project your vulnerability outward. Your spiritual life enriches as you develop a more balanced relationship with both masculine and feminine aspects of existence. Jung saw this integration as not just personal healing, but as essential collective work. In a world increasingly polarized between masculine and feminine energies, each individual who undertakes this integration contributes to the healing of the collective psyche. Have you recognized this pattern in your own relationships? That moment of clarity can be both painful and liberating. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what another viewer needs to recognize their own pattern and begin their journey toward integration. If this video has illuminated something important for you, take a moment to like it and subscribe to our channel. We're building a community dedicated to genuine psychological insight and transformation. And don't miss our previous videos exploring other aspects of Jungian psychology and relationships. The journey toward wholeness is ongoing, and each insight builds upon the last. Remember, what Jung discovered wasn't a reason for despair, but an invitation to greater consciousness. The shadow patterns that have unconsciously controlled your relationships can be transformed through awareness. You can move from being devoured by archetypes to consciously engaging with the full spectrum of both masculine and feminine energies. This isn't just about better relationships with women, it's about a more integrated relationship with yourself. And that transformation changes everything.